We shouldn't abort female fetuses with any more frequency than male fetuses. On its face, that seems like a no-brainer, right? And that seemingly simple, even seemingly feminist logic is what anti-abortion lawmakers are relying on when they introduce PRENDA bills. PRENDA stands for Prenatal Nondiscrimination Act, and several states have passed these laws which criminalize the practice of seeking an abortion based on the sex of the fetus. What could be so bad about that? Lots. To tell us more about why PRENDA laws are particularly insidious and racist, we're joined by two guests from the National Asian Pacific American Women's Forum, Winnie Ye, who is the Communications and Community Engagement Chair. Welcome to 112BK.
Thank you.
And Becca Asaki, the NYC organizer. Great to have you here.
Thanks so much.
So let's start off with just an overview of PRENDA laws. They sound great on the surface, or at least, innocuous. But Winnie, can you tell us why actually they're highly problematic?
Yeah, it's exactly what you just said. So sex-selective abortion bans, or PRENDA bills, are actually just a political ruse. It's really like a wolf in sheep's clothing. So the law would stipulate that it would be illegal for doctors and providers to provide abortion care if they suspected that a woman was doing it because of a preference for a sex. But actually, that is not the case at all, and it's important to note that sex-selective abortion bans are rooted, like you said, in anti-immigrant sentiment, in racism, in sexism, and they specifically target the Asian American and Pacific Islander community. So this is actually based on a false notion that Asian American women prefer sons to daughters, but that's not the case. There's no factual evidence for that claim. And in fact, a study by the University of Chicago in 2014 found that Asian American women actually had more daughters compared to their white counterparts. So this is really just politicians, once again, trying to co-opt feminism and to use Asian American women as political pawns to advance their extreme agenda, which is to, one, ban abortion in this country, and two, if they can't ban it, push it further out of reach by putting in place these obstacles.
Right, it's just trying to chip away at the reproductive rights of women. And I think, as you mentioned, what's really tricky about this is that they position it as a feminist issue, right? Where it's like, well, if you're a feminist, obviously you don't want somebody to abort female fetuses on the basis of sex. So Becca, walk me through this criminalization. What would that mean if an Asian American woman, for example, presents at her doctor's office and says, I would like to terminate my pregnancy? If there's a PRENDA law in place, what then happens?
It would put the onus on the provider to call into question why someone is seeking an abortion. And it's one of the reasons why it's such a sexist law is because Asian American women are put forward as having these preferences for sons, which does not exist, as Winnie mentioned. Providers would be more likely to ask Asian women why they are seeking an abortion. And we think that adds an additional barrier to women that are trying to seek the full extent of care for themselves.
Basically like racially profiling your patients. When you go into a doctor's office, you're just trying to get the care that you need and to just go about your day. But doctors, this would create a chilling effect for them to basically be profiling their patients. And this would actually also punish doctors. There would be fines that they would have to face.
And I think it's important to note that this is a medical procedure.
Right.
And it's not like when you go to an oral surgeon for your wisdom teeth to be taken out.
Right.
They ask you well, why do you want your wisdom teeth taken out? Is there is that some cultural thing that you do?
Right. And we think that it would basically would target a lot more recent immigrants or other people who have already barriers, whether it's language barriers or cultural barriers in being able to express themselves in a medical setting. And we think that the decision should be one that is made in between doctors and their patients, and that lawmakers should not be speculating as to why women are seeking abortions.
Right. And so some of these laws have been passed at the state level. Is that right, Winnie?
Yes.
Can you give me some of the states where PRENDA laws are on the books?
So they're on the books in 8 states. So states like, I think, the Dakotas, I want to also say Illinois, Indiana, but in Illinois and Indiana, they're not in effect. So last year, a U.S. Court of Appeals in the 7th District actually struck down PRENDA and said that this is an unconstitutional law.
And Becca, do these laws specifically target Asian American women? Does the word Asian appear in the wording of the bill?
Yeah, so in a lot of bills, they can say specifically in the preamble, like in the reasoning as to why they want to be passed, that they want to that this is a common practice among Asian communities, and that's one of the reasons why we see through it as like so significantly, so obviously and blatantly a racist law. And even in bills that they don't specifically call this out, many times politicians will speak about the Asian American community specifically when discussing the bills.
Right, it's used a lot in the marketing of the bills, right, to potential voters.
They're trying to use Asian American women as a wedge, as to say that this is about gender equality when that couldn't be further from the truth, Asian American women already face so many barriers when it comes to accessing healthcare, whether that be, they don't have affordable insurance coverage, if they're undocumented, if they are low income and can't afford the copays, or if they just can't even navigate, the complex like health insurance and health systems. So I would say, if politicians really did care about gender equality, they would be making sure that every person in this country had affordable and comprehensive insurance coverage. They would be focused on passing paid family leave, equal pay for equal work. But instead, they're really just trying to use these racist and sexist stereotypes to ultimately ban abortion in this country.
So one issue is that there is a study that was done that was pointing to the 2000 census, and this is something that was like covered on NPR and in the New York Times. And people who support these sex-selective abortion bills often point to this and say, well, it is a problem in this country. The census showed that Asian American women, and I think it was like Korean, Chinese, and Indian women who had a third child, where the first two children were girls, had a 50% higher likelihood than Caucasian women of having a male baby. And people use this to say that this shows that there is some type of like pre-birth selection going on, whether that's sex-selective abortion or in vitro fertilization or some other type of gender determination. So you referenced a more recent study. This is taken from data from the year 2000. Can you talk a little bit about that recent study and what it shows and why this is not something that people need to fear?
Yeah, so the study by the University of Chicago, it basically found that Asian American women actually had more daughters than their white counterparts. So basically saying that sex-selective abortion is not a thing, and that really, at the end of the day, we should just kind of trust women to make the decisions that are best for them and to kind of, plan their families in the way that they want to.
Yeah, I think that this is a rhetorical difficulty often with talking to, other feminists or people about why PRENDA bills are not necessary and are in fact racist, is because, historically, perhaps sex-selective abortion has been a problem, especially in countries like Asia and India, where currently there is a woman shortage as a result of patriarchal and sexist policies, the one-child policy in China, for example. So how do you go about asking people to sort of hold these two ideas in their head, that in China and India there is a shortage of women, and that in the U.S., sex-selective abortion is not an active issue in an Asian American population, and we shouldn't be allowed to be used as a wedge issue?
People are rightly concerned about gender inequality across the world, and really want to figure out what are the things that we can do to fight gender inequality. So like as Winnie was saying, if you really truly care about women's rights, if you truly care about women excelling and having full autonomy over our lives, families, and communities, like equal pay for equal work, livable wages, childcare, being free from sexual harassment in the workplace, there's so many things that we can be doing that will actually get to some of the root causes of gender inequality. But sex-selective abortion bans are not the way there.
And I think you're right. There is patriarchy, there is colonialism, there are all these sort of structures. And so I think that's why it's even more important to make sure that women have access to the full range of reproductive health care.
As Asian American women, does this resonate with you, the rhetoric that you're hearing by anti-abortion activists who are putting forward PRENDA bills, that women aren't valued in Asian American communities?
I think that's one of the reasons why it's such an important issue for us is, I know in my family, like women are celebrated. We are like the leaders of our family, our community. We are it's not only that we're valued, but that we're seen as an important intrinsic part of our family and community. And for people to say that Asian Americans don't care about girl children it's offensive.
Yeah.
It's deeply offensive and deeply hurtful. And I think really drives me to say, like, this is why we are pushing back. In New York, we're pushing for a resolution, the city council to pass a resolution saying against these sex-selective abortion bans, because we want New York to kind of stand up and stand with our families and say, like, this is not an issue in our community. It's offensive that you're saying that it is an issue in our community, that you're using us as a wedge, when we know that that women are celebrated in our community, and we want also to take on sexism in our community and in the United States, and are leading in that fight.
Yeah,
Winnie?
like while sexism is a thing, it is seeped into our country. These bans are just a distraction. They're just really a political ruse. And I think it's really insulting that politicians are trying to pin Asian Americans against other women. Women of color have been at the forefront of the fight for reproductive rights. And so it's really just, it's just very insulting that they are trying to use us as a political pawn.
So you mentioned that NAPAWF is trying to pass a resolution at the state level in New York. Is New York in danger of having a PRENDA law submitted to the legislature?
So there are currently, I believe, 6 states who have introduced PRENDA-like laws across the country, and they're moving. Like, they are passing legislative chambers. In New York, even though we're a progressive state, we have seen anti-choice bills pop up. One of the PRENDA bills has been introduced even in Oregon, right? And so I think that's why it's so important for New York City to kind of take a stand. Not only is New York City one of the leaders when it comes to reproductive freedom, but there's a large number of Asian Americans who live in New York City. And so I think when there's a lot of misinformation going around, that's where elected officials can really stand up, voice opposition to this insidious bill, and to really say that this is not aligned with our values of ensuring that everybody has access to reproductive health care.
And what about on the national level?
On the national level, I think there definitely are politicians who are galvanized. Honestly, they will say whatever they can and use whatever claims they can to push their extreme agenda.
Right, and many anti-abortion politicians are in the books as saying if we can't overturn Roe v. Wade, we will chip away at abortion rights.
Exactly.
However we can.
Exactly. We'll make sure that poor women just can't have abortions, with the Hyde Amendment. We'll make sure that women of color can't have abortions with laws like PRENDA.
Yeah, and I mean, in many ways, NAPAWF has been fighting these sex-selective abortion bans across the country as they've come up.
Yeah.
But in New York City, we're trying to have pass it's a city resolution. So New York State, PRENDA bill has been introduced every year since 2015.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so we are one of the reasons why we want New York City to pass the resolution is, if we in progressive, leader in reproductive justice, New York City with, the largest Asian population in the country, if we can't move it here, where can we move it, right? And I think that we're actually calling on the city to really take a stance in support of us here, but it's also in the context of it's in this national context of how PRENDA is being, more and more introduced in different states, as you said, to kind of chip away at the rights we already have.
Well, thank you both so much for coming on the show to talk about this. Becca, Winnie, thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.